Good afternoon, friends. Um, have you ever noticed how often God seems to have picked poor choices initially to get a job done? There's a few weeks ago we studied about Moses and how a stammering Moses at age 80, um, after being a complete failure at 40 years old, he said to God, "No, I can't. It's possibly not me. It's not possibly someone like me who would do the job that you require." And that is to save and rescue the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt. There's also the slave boy named Joseph who liked to daydream a lot, and yet God chose him. There's also a fisherman in Peter who was very moody and indecisive, and he was going to be the one who would lead this bunch of disciples to turn the world upside down. And there's other people and other characters in the Old and New Testament who God picked and choose uh, in spite of themselves, in spite of their background, in spite of their abilities. In fact, it's not always capability God looks at, for much as it is with availability and pliability. God can always teach capability, you see, but availability and flexibility, we must offer those things to God. There are great abilities, for example, that people acquire, people cultivate, and demonstrate. In the service of God, there is one ability that is the greatest ability of all. What is it? It's sociability, compatibility, accountability, adaptability, or reliability, right? Actually, no. The greatest ability, friends, is availability. It is if we are not available to God and for God, no matter what kind of ability that we have, it is of no good. Ability without availability is actually a liability. And what does availability mean? It means that we are to place ourselves um, totally, absolutely, and completely at God's disposal for Him. And for Him to do anything and everything He wants to do in us and through us. So um, anything less than that is putting actually restrictions on God. And so we read in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. It says there, "And what shall I more say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, and of Barak, and of Samson, and of Jephthah, and of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness we were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to fight the armies of the aliens." Now, we want to think of today on this subject, the good fight of faith. In fact, in the Old Testament, is filled with accounts of battles in which a decided underdog pulls off an upset victory using a unique and unconventional strategy, uh, what you might call a sacred strategy. We know of military generals, great military generals, and they think of the battles of Joshua as something that's brilliant. But during that time, it seemed to be like not conventional wisdom or even stupidity to do what he did. That's like what we learned last week of just marching around once the city of Jericho, and then on the seventh day, just obeying in detail what God instructed them to do, and marching around and for 7 times on the seventh day, and blowing their trumpets. See, what it takes is not really military genius or strategy or everything that we've learned humanly, but what it takes is what we call faith. So today we will be learning about Gideon and what made him do the impossible, seemingly impossible mission that God has given to him. And the battle of Gideon here, we will learn during the time of the judges, before the Israelites were ruled by kings, God called a man, and his name is Gideon, to lead them into battle. And Gideon certainly seemed an unusual choice. He didn't seem to fit the bill um, to be a general. And when God called him to service, he was threshing his grain in a pit in order to hide himself from Israel's enemies, the Midianites. Can you imagine that? Someone God will choose, in spite of being scared of the enemy. And yet the angel told Gideon, "The Lord is helping you, and you are a strong warrior, a valiant warrior." Um, and we can see here that there are at least two battles that Gideon had to go through. The first battle was a spiritual one. See, God ordered him to tear down a nearby altar to the Canaanite god Baal. Still unsure of his power and his calling, Gideon performed the task at night to avoid actually being seen. Yet he was soon found out. And so when the townspeople discovered what he had done, they cried out, "Kill him! Kill him!" So Gideon's father rescued him only after diplomatically suggesting that if Baal had been a real god, then he would certainly have avenged himself against Gideon. See, God then next instructed Gideon to take a stand against the powerful Midianites. And we see that they were tormenting Israel. The Midianites were a very cruel people, and so anxious was Gideon, in fact, about the assignment that he asked God to confirm his word through a sign. And Gideon placed a fleece on the ground one night, asking God, that in the morning it would be wet with dew, even though the ground was dry. He asked for a sign, and it happened exactly as he asked. Still, Gideon was reluctant, and he requested an additional sign. See, he was not satisfied with the first. He requested God for another sign. This time, he asked that in the morning the ground would be wet, with the fleece was dry. So while the fleece was dry, the ground would be wet. Again, it happened. It happened just as he had requested. My question is this: do we sometimes do that in our prayers? Do we sometimes ask God for a sign, and then after God answers us exactly the way we ask, and still the faith is not there? And still we doubt God, still we don't trust in His word and His promises? And God actually next, finally, when all these signs were fulfilled, he was convinced. He was convinced that he had earned God's support. So Gideon prepared now. He prepared to face the Midianites with a mighty army of 32,000 men. And but now God unveiled a true unconventional strategy, one designed to show the people that their strength, their might, uh, must be rooted in their faith and not in their numbers. In fact, 22,000 soldiers in all, they immediately departed. didn't want to have anything to do with the battle and against the Midianites because they were outnumbered, truly outnumbered. Even with their 32,000 men strong army. But now God unveiled this true unconventional strategy. And He would show them and He would test them in this that when Gideon was told to lead the remaining men to the water's edge and watch them drink, only those who knelt and drank by putting their faces in the water were asked to stay. So this was a test by God. Sometimes God also, in our own lives, would test our faith. Have you come to a point where you feel that God is actually testing your faith? That not everything is given to you on a silver platter, and that everything would be convenient. That you're in your own little bubble, and trying to be as comfortable as you can. Maybe God is asking you to get out of that bubble. Maybe God is asking you to get out of your comfort zones, and that He will actually give you a test of faith. And so we look back into the story, and after this reduction in the ranks of the people, God's army, or Gideon's army, consisted then now of a squad of only some 300 soldiers. So we know from the story, if we read it, Judges 6 and 7, chapter 6 and 7,